Hi, my name is Gary T. McDonald. I'm the author of The Gospel of Thomas the Younger, and some friends have asked me to speak a few words about my take on the Apostle Paul in my book. One place to start is to realize that Paul, who was originally named Saul, grew up in a town called Tarsus in what we now call Turkey. It was then called Asia Minor. And he lived in this town that was right on the crossroads between the Persian Empire and the traditional Greek Empire. At that time, in the first century, the Romans ruled the world, but it was still very much a culture of the Greeks, and suffused with mystery cults of all different kinds that worshipped various demigods. By demigod, I mean the offspring of a god and a mortal. And people found these to be very useful in their lives because it brought gods closer to them in their own lives. And they worshipped various ones like Dionysus and Attis and Baal Taraz, who was the reigning god of the area that Paul grew up in. So these Hellenized Jews, like Paul, who lived in various parts of this Roman Empire and Greek culture, were very different from the people that grew up in Palestinian Judea and Galilee, like Jesus and his followers. Jesus and his followers lived in a tradition of worshiping a single God and going to the temple every so often in Jerusalem to sacrifice to this God. And these mystery cults would have been just anathema to them. They would not have subscribed to that at all. But after Jesus was crucified, various people from all over the Roman Empire, Jews, drifted into Jerusalem for various reasons, because they wanted to visit Jerusalem or they wanted to study there, like Paul wanted to study there. And they began to hear this story of Jesus. And not only the story of Jesus in real life, but the stories embellished about Jesus for years and years and years after he had died. Stories that formed an oral tradition that got embellished over campfires, many, many evenings, with people telling the stories and retelling them, so that miracles started appearing in them and all kinds of other things. And these Hellenized Jews, like Stephen and others mentioned in Acts, picked up on this, and an idea started forming in their minds that this was a mystery cult that they could get into. And Stephen started proclaiming a doctrine like this in Jerusalem and was immediately arrested and tried and taken out to the edges of town and stoned to death for it. Now we know that the followers of Jesus, the ones he grew up with, the ones that he met along the way in his mission and that knew him in life, probably didn't believe this mystery cult kind of idea, because sometime earlier, some of his surviving friends were preaching something about Jesus, and they were arrested and tried, and the leader of the Pharisees spoke up for them, and they were acquitted and released. So we know that there may have been real differences between what these Hellenized Jews on the one hand thought and the original followers of Jesus, who called themselves the followers of Jesus' way, or the way followers, what they believed and what they preached. So at a certain point after Jesus had died, Saul arrives in Jerusalem to study with the rabbis there. He wants to be a Pharisee rabbi. And we don't know how long he actually studied with the great leader Gamaliel there, but I suspect it wasn't very long, because that teaching involved a lot of rigorous logic and also extreme knowledge of the Torah in Hebrew. every time we read a quote from the Torah in Paul's letters, it's always from the Greek translation of the Torah, the Septuagint. And so we know that Paul relied more on the Septuagint than he did his actual own translation of the Hebrew in the Torah. So I suspect that Paul didn't last very long in Gamaliel's academy. And soon he radically changes and leaves the company of the Pharisees and joins with the opposite party and starts to work for the high priest in Jerusalem, persecuting people that are proclaiming this new cult religion that the Hellenized Jews that like Jesus' story are starting to proclaim. And in fact, Saul, later Paul, is involved in the execution of Stephen for proclaiming that kind of theology. Paul goes to a mission to persecute, to kidnap and bring back for trial some of these Christians in Damascus. And on the road to Damascus across the desert, he has this seizure where he hears Jesus' voice telling him to stop persecuting the Christians. And in Damascus, he starts learning from these Greek Christians, these Greek-speaking Jew Christians, and he starts buying into their theology and, in fact, developing it himself. And some years later, he goes on missions throughout the Roman Empire to spread this new theology that's very much like a mystery cult with a demigod who is born of a mortal woman, but the Almighty God, the Father figure, and who belief in that is the requirement for salvation. That's what Paul preaches. But that was very different from what the direct disciples of Jesus, the people that knew him in life, probably believed. They would not have cottoned to the idea of separating God into parts like that, Father and Son. They believed that God was all one, not separable, not divisible in any kind of way. And they believed that Jesus might have been a Messiah, but that's a very different thing. A Messiah is simply a kind of a hero figure that would reunite the Jews with the help of God to overthrow whoever was oppressing them at the moment, in this case, the Romans. Now, Jesus and his followers actually tested that by fulfilling some of the prophecies, or trying to fulfill some of the prophecies to see if Jesus was actually the Messiah. But Jesus, of course, was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he did not fulfill the prophecies. There wasn't a huge overthrow of the Roman Empire, or at least the Roman occupation of Judea, and Jesus was killed. But that was woven into the mystery cult story that the followers of Stephen and Paul developed over the course of the first century. Now, we know everything we know about Jesus is from the Pauline camp, the followers of Paul. Paul's letters, his followers who wrote the Gospels. We have no writings from the Jerusalem Way followers at all. Either those texts were destroyed or they never were written down in the first place. And so we only have what Paul wants us to know about the story of Jesus. And you can see that as this cult develops throughout the Roman Empire, it moves further and further away from the beliefs of what a Jewish reformer like Jesus would have taught. So I think that's where I will stop on this one, and I will pick up on another video talking about Paul's particular personality. Thank you.